Amazing. I'd like to call this meeting of the Ed Affairs Committee to order. We will start the meeting with a board roll call with Ms. Murphy.
Robin Murphy present.
Daniel Schultz present.
Jennifer Lemon present.
Liam Mulhern present.
Zachary Epps present.
Pamela Henry present.
Charles Burdell Williams present.
I want to see if Ms. Blitzstein is online. She said she might join us. Ross Whiting present. At this time, I'd like to, I will accept a motion to approve the minutes.
Henry.
Second, Ms. Murphy. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dr. Reilly, and thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming early as well. Unusual Ed Affairs event that we started at 6 o'clock tonight because we had our annual PBL study showcase prior to our meeting. So for those that are joining remotely, apologies for the late start. But we'll jump into things. So while we had a showcase around what's happening in classrooms around PBL and STEM, tonight's focus in terms of the actual slide deck is going to primarily be around skills and the new science standards. So as we always do, our mission, vision, and our essence, focusing on belonging and equity, diversity throughout the district. One of the things that is happening around the change in science is there has been a lot of focus on equity in scientific education. We won't necessarily see that in tonight's presentation because it's the drier version of things because there's a lot of details in there. But there has been a lot of work done in terms of the writing of the standards with a focus around it. So before we get into the actual presentation on steels, I mentioned it down in the auditorium, but I just want to thank everyone for their participation tonight. Each year it has gotten a little bit bigger. This is the first time we've actually scaled back a little bit because it was a little crowded last year. But I think the flow felt better. People had a chance to engage with students and teachers in a deeper way than they had last year. So I want to thank the teachers and students who are all participated, whether they were here or not. A lot of projects that you saw came from students who couldn't make it. And we had some other teachers who this particular date just didn't work for them, but they would have been here as well. So I'm sharing a slide that shows the teachers who either contributed or were here in person with their projects or the students' projects and their students. Also, this is a chance for me to thank our entire department. And so within the Office of Education, we have a number of people that contribute to the work that's happening that you saw examples of down the hall, but it's happening across the district in all of our schools. So our Department of Innovation is made up of the names that you see on the screen here, some of which are here tonight. So you'll obviously hear from myself. But also Ms. Ferraro and Ms. Girman will be presenting a little bit of tonight's presentation as well. Dr. Pimentel couldn't make it tonight, and so I'll share some of his slides at the very end. Also, I just want to shout out to our facilities department and our technology department, because again, without their support, our showcase doesn't happen. So in terms of our strategic plan and where we are situated, most of the work that we're talking about tonight sits under the teaching and learning pillar. We've already gone through the showcase, but I'm going to do a skills overview, which are the new science standards. Ms. Ferraro will take over and talk about the work that has been done in the K-5 science curriculum design. Ms. Girman will talk about where we are, or the process that we're going through right now for both secondary math and K-12 science, high quality instructional material adoptions. And then I'll finish up with plans for the future around STEM programming. So first of all, I'll start with STEELS, why it's called STEELS. It used to just be the science standards or science and technology standards. STEELS stands for science, technology and engineering, environmental literacy, and sustainability. So that's the acronym STEELS. The science is the same 3 domains that we've been studying for years. That part has not changed. The way standards are written has changed dramatically. So students will still be learning about Earth and space, life science, physical science. In addition to that, the technology and engineering standards have been pulled out of the science and technology standards and have their own distinct category now. There are some differences in the way the standards are written. The science standards are written as grade-specific standards. Technology and engineering and environmental literacy and sustainability are written as grade-banded standards. And so we have flexibility in terms of where they are placed in our curriculum. The theme or messaging around the shift in science education, that's not just in Cheltenham, that's not just in Pennsylvania, that's across the country, is moving from this idea of learning about science to figuring out science. And so that's sort of a phrase that has been shared in every one of the sessions we've been to. It's in a lot of the literature. So we're encouraging our students to figure things out rather than just learn about it. These next 2 components, phenomena-based and 3-dimensional, are 2 key phrases that define the shift in skills. And I'll talk about the shifts more specifically later on, but everything that we're doing now will be phenomena. Everything moving forward, I should say. Implementation of skills officially kicks off next year. We've been working towards this over the last several years. The state showed us a glimpse of what the new standards would be about 3 years ago. But they are full implementation is expected to take place next year. And so the first thing, phenomena-based, the idea there is that we start with something real, so real situations, real scenarios, something that students can connect with, and we get them engaged in the learning phenomena. 3 dimensions are science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, and disciplinary core ideas. And so to simplify that language, science and engineering practices are the things that students are going to do in the classroom. And so some examples are asking questions, designing and completing investigations, and then developing and using models. The disciplinary core ideas is sort of the basis for what our standards currently are. It's stuff, it's the facts. So it's what are they going to know regarding about the disciplinary core ideas or DCIs. So things like energy. We had a sample tonight around thermal energy, structures of life, Earth systems, and then engineering design. And engineering design sort of filters throughout a lot of the new science. And then the last piece are the cross-cutting concepts. This is where we're encouraging different habits around thinking and giving students some tools how they should be thinking about what they should be looking for as they engage in investigations, as they ask questions, as they study specifics around energy. So things like looking for patterns in data, understanding cause and effect, especially around developing models and thinking about scale. So all this work started back in, well, before 2012, but the publication of this text, a framework for K-12 science education, is what kicked off this shift in the way that we think about science education. And so this framework comes from that book, and it has all the parts, but it's a little bit messy. So we can clean this up a little bit because they've grouped all the things that we're thinking about. And over time, this has started to materialize into something called the Next Generation Science Standards, which came out in 2013. Pennsylvania did not adopt those. We waited 12 years to come up with our own standards. So in 2025, 26, we had new standards that look very much like NGSS, but this was the foundation of where NGSS came from and therefore where STEELS has come from as well. But to streamline the thinking here a little bit, the 5 E's model is a better picture. It's much neater to look at this. And I don't suggest that it's a linear process at all in the way that we're doing science education. But we're using phenomena to engage students in science. Once they have experience with phenomena, we want them to explore that, design investigations, try to uncover learning within the phenomena. in order to have them share what they've learned through that exploration phase, there needs to be some way that they demonstrate an understanding, right? And so we want them to explain that in some way. And sometimes what that means is redesigning that investigation because it may have not gotten to the disciplinary core idea that we really want them to. So that's why this is cyclical in terms of the way that we're approaching this. And so we don't see these as siloed events. Elaborate is the piece where we want students taking what they know, what they've learned, and applying it to something that's new, right? And so we can now start to introduce another phenomenon where it's connected to the phenomenon that we started with. And so this all cycles around the three dimensions, starting with the phenomenon. Right, this is an example of this current standard. Right, so this is a kindergarten standard. This is what the state has provided to us. This is from kindergarten. This is what the new standard looks like. Right, so they put a little bit of work into this. So what this also means is the support for our teachers is a shift from a statement to this. So this includes a similar standard at the very top here. So we see that this is kindergarten as well. In life science, the 3 simply means it's science. 1 and 2 are ELA and math. What we see though, instead of a standard written out, is STEELS is based on performance expectations. And so this line here, students who demonstrate understanding can, you're going to see that a lot throughout the standards. And so there's a performance expectation tied to this. What you're not going to see is the phenomenon. So that's not embedded in the standard. That's up to the work of either pulling that from a resource where the teachers can choose the phenomenon that makes the most sense for their grade level, for their students at the time that they're learning that standard. I'm not going to go through all the pieces, but in the middle, you see the colored boxes that represent the 3 dimensions. All right, so while it's phenomena-based, the phenomenon is not here, but the 3 dimensions are. So the expectation is that those specific pieces of the 3 dimensions are being learned underneath this standard, or this performance expectation. The other pieces that they've included, which is a nice feature of STEELS as compared to NGSS, is they include PA context. They also include connections to other standards. And so I've got this is a little bit hard to read. And again, we're not going to read all of this, but we can look at the standard a little bit closer in a moment. Just to bring some clarity around all the changes or shifts as it relates to K-12 science education moving forward, starting with next year, is again, it is 3-dimensional, both in the instructional piece, what the activities students engage in, but also in the assessment piece. And we'll look at what a change or the difference in assessment is going to look like as well. But that's a big shift in terms of asking students to demonstrate understanding through a 3-dimensional assessment. Engaging meaningful and authentic phenomena. That's why they don't put it in the standard, because what's authentic to us may not be authentic to a school district that's in the VA. All operating underneath the STEELS, but we can craft the phenomena that makes the most sense for our students in our district. There's a lot of engineering embedded throughout. The technology and engineering standards are vast. There are a lot of them. They're written in a way that we can embed them in other science lessons, though. And so when we say we're doing a life science lesson, there may be a technology and engineering standard that's also being addressed in that lesson, in that unit. And so there's a much greater balance between the ideas around engineering and design with science. It's not just pure science. There's a lot greater focus around coherence and progressions in terms of the sequencing of what the students are learning as a standard development. And so if we do a good job with the phenomena, the students are going to feel like each lesson or each unit in science belongs with the one that came before it, rather than one-off hands-on activity that they may not touch on again until 2 years later. So the student experience is going to be highly impacted by number 4 here in terms of the coherence and progression. And PEs just stands for performance expectations. And then the last piece is the integration with other. When we think about the concept of STEM, I know the sign on the door, on the wall outside my door is S period, T period. But we need to change that because that just signifies the isolation of the content, where it should be STEM as a word, as a concept that integrates, and it doesn't have to just be science, technology, engineering, and math, because students have to be able to read and write in order to do science club. And so we include ELA. There's actually a lot of overlap with social studies as well. So there is a deliberate or intentional focus in the development of skills to include the other core content areas. So the next couple slides are going to show the standards a little bit closer. So just so you can see another example. So this is a 6-8 example. And again, the science and engineering practices are spelled out. It's not every one of them, there's just one. And so what we see a lot of times in a math resource with the standards of mathematical practice, they'll say, here's the 8 math practices for this unit. And they just repeat that every time. They're much more intentional in the way that they've laid out the school standards to say that this is the engineering practice that goes with this particular standard. And so teachers won't feel overwhelmed that they have to try to include all of them on their own all the time. And that's true of the DCIs, the disciplinary core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts. And they do more than just list it. So in terms of science and engineering practice, analyzing and interpreting data is the practice, but they give definition as it relates to this standard and what's expected. A little bit closer look at some of the other standards, the PA context, also the PA career ready skills are included. This will vary depending on the performance expectations. And so in this case, they have an agriculture standard, they won't always. They have an ELA standard, they won't always. And so it varies from standard to standard. And then the last piece, and I included this one, first of all, as part of the standard, but this also highlights that we're going outside of some of the PA standards, and you can see SD is included here, ITEA standards are included here as well. So just a comparison from the assessment. This is what an old assessment question may look like. And so if students know the theory of plate tectonics, they're going to do great on this question because they just have to choose and answer and move on. All right. Read the question. Sometimes the way these are written, if you can find the answer in the question, then you're going to do okay. This is what the new assessment is going to look like. And so given a short passage, sometimes a lengthy passage, maybe a diagram, a model, an image, followed by a series of prompts or tasks for them to do based on what they know as it applies to the new scenario that they've been given. So this requires a lot deeper thinking and understanding of the content and applying the 3 dimensions. So to finish up with assessment, this is sort of the schedule where we are today. I did a presentation on STEELs a couple of years ago when we were just getting started. We're just about to start implementation now. So this year's PSSA has moved to 5th grade. That has been the plan. That was approved by the U.S. Department of Education last year. That test, while 5th graders, even though they tested in 4th grade last year, they are testing as 5th graders this year. There's only accountability for participation. There's no accountability for performance this year. It's a baseline year for the performance data. And so they'll use that data to start setting goals for the future, starting with next year, because next year performance will be reported. That's also true for 8th grade. While the test remains in 8th grade, which is where it has always been, it's still a field test based on the STEELS standard. So while STEELS, the implementation doesn't begin until next year, the tests are aligned to STEELS. So they're going to see those scenario-based questions this year. And so we get a glimpse of it before it counts. All right. Again, just like 5th grade, next year it'll be full implementation. So accountability for participation and performance will begin next year for 8th grade. And then biology, this one's a little bit different. The alignment with biology in terms of standards is still to the older standard, 2010. Next year, the winter test will still be aligned to the old standard. So for a school district like ours that is block scheduled, semester-based, our winter tests will be distinctly different from our spring. So depending on when students take biology, they will experience the test differently. And so the spring biology keystone next year will be aligned to the STEM standards. And then lastly on here, we have the CDTs. This is true for the fall. So CDTs are going to be adjusted to reflect skills as well as scenario-based testing or scenario-based questions. And so the CDT is a classroom diagnostic test that is developed by DRC with the state, and it will be aligned to the new standards starting. And then the last slide I have before I turn over to Mr. Ferraro is just a little bit of the professional development that we've engaged in over the last couple of years. The MCIU has done a lot of work to promote the change to steels. They've run a Science of Steel session several times over the last couple of years. We've had the ability to send a number of teachers to go part of that so that when they return to the district, they form the leadership team essentially among our teachers in terms of making this shift. They've also run Engineering 101 a few times, which is aligned with a program called YES, but more importantly, it's aligned to the implementation of the technology. And then they've also hosted a Steels Expo. This year will be the third one of the Steels Expo. In the past 2 years, it's been focused around resources. So they've invited vendors in to come in and just show off what they have to offer. This year, they've invited school districts and teachers to participate and demonstrate what they're doing differently in their classroom as a reflection of their shift to Steels. And so we have a handful of teachers that are being part of that are presenting at the Steels Expo for all of Montgomery County teachers to see. That takes place on May 20th, which is essentially the first learning day for all schools in Montgomery County. So we get to see what other districts are doing, and other districts get to see what we're doing. And so in district, we have a curriculum team. Ms. Ferraro has been leading all the work from an elementary standpoint in terms of the shift there. I believe the shift in elementary is much more significant than it is for secondary. A lot of the secondary standards, while they look, they're packaged differently, the content remains similar. It's a much bigger lift for us at the elementary level. And so Ms. Ferraro has been leading that work. We have a team of teachers that's been engaged in that. We also brought in a woman by the name of Erin McCool. She has an organization called Cool Heron. She has experience with a number of different organizations, but she's been part of the statewide team in terms of bringing skills to school districts as well as the development of the new assessments. And so she came in and met with both our elementary teachers and our secondary teachers to give an overview of this shift to Steels. And then some other things, DVCE did a fantastic presentation at Abington High School last year that unpacked all of Steels under the umbrella of diversity and equity. So I participated in that, and we've used a lot of the resources that were shared there for the work that we're doing in the district. This past December, yes, Ms. Girman and I were both at SAS. Trying to remember everyone who went where. The state puts on a presentation every year. Prior to SAS beginning, though, there was a really good session on helping teachers and building leaders think about what should teachers be doing in classrooms and what help support them. And so we have a resource there that we're going to turn around as well next year. NSTA happened to be in Philadelphia this year. So we had a number of teachers and administrators that were able to go to that. And so Ms. Ferraro and myself were both at NSTA this year. Tremendous number of resources. I'm very that. Specifically for me, I saw a lot around assessment design in that scenario-based, phenomena-based shift that we're going through. And then the other thing we've been doing is we've been trying to get a handle on what resources are out there and what do our teachers think about those and how our students engaging those. So we've been running some different pilots across the district at different grade levels for the last 3 years. And so we do have some information from a resource standpoint in terms of what's available, what it is that does work for us and what doesn't work. I'll leave more comments around the resource from Ms. Girman when we get to the H2IM. But I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ferraro to talk about the K-5 science curriculum time.
I've been working with the K-5 skill standards with Mr. Murphy, and what we've been doing is we've been taking these standards and breaking them down and aligning them and grouping them into units that are cohesive and attainable for our teachers. So we did the UBD Understanding by Design framework, which is the rest of our curriculum is written in as well. We mapped out the standards to then have objectives so that it's easier for our teachers to know what they have to do, what the kids have to do, the skills, the knowledge they have to receive. We've sent it out to review to the teachers. We are the lens of one view. The teachers are doing the work. We need to see what makes sense. We gathered a lot of feedback from them. We made adjustments to see what was worked. Like kindergarten weather unit was unit 2, and that was taught in the winter. And they're like, wouldn't it be better if it was in the spring or fall where we could take our kids out? Like, yes, that's brilliant. Duh. So just simple adjustments from the lens that our people are doing the work that can help advocate and get on board with this shift as they're doing the work. So our next step on May 20th, we will be unpacking the STEEL standards with our K-5 teachers. So we will be taking a curriculum for all of our teachers to have in front of them, really looking at what does a STEEL standard look like in this unit particular, what are my kids going to have to do, try and have them identify the skills and knowledge on their own and seeing if it aligns to the units that we have. We will then also take our curriculum that we wrote, and when we're going into our process of writing or choosing our resources, we are making sure something that aligns and makes sense with our vision and our needs within the district. So this was some of the work, the messy work that was fun. We printed out all the T&E standards because they are grade banded. We needed to make sure that they aligned and they are logically built in to where the unit aligns and to our kids' ability to do. And that's attainable within the classroom time period. A science block in an elementary classroom looks a little different than in a Cedarville classroom. So what can some things be done? So we broke it up, made sure alignment was done. And also then where the sustainability standards, how they are grade banded, how they look, and how we can make sure they function within the unit to make more sense.
So part of our work as well is around looking at various resources for math and science. One of the phrases that we're hearing more and more is this idea of high quality instructional materials. There's a couple of different ways that that could be interpreted, but one of the ways that we've been particularly looking at it is using a variety of sources around ed reports, and then also getting feedback from our teachers who are piloting a couple of them and trying to get a sense of what works, what doesn't. And then part of that work also is with our work with school kid. So this came out of the development of our curriculum cycle. This is what we have right now. These are things that we have had to adjust a couple of different times as our needs changed or as resources expired. But one of the first places that we started when we were building this is the STEEL standard, knowing that at this very clear deadline of when we needed to make sure that we had resource and standards implemented. And so we have it as a 6-phase cycle. And this gives us a guide for the year of who is doing what work. And we try to also be fiscally responsible about it too, and not put the really heavy hitter content costs all in the same bucket. So right now, obviously in 24-25, most of our work is around phase 2 and phase 1. So our needs assessment for 6-12 math, and then planning phase is really K-12 science, and looking at what it is that we want to do in terms of resources for them, and that is in conjunction with teachers and community members with school kit. So we had, as part of this work, Ms. Savage gave us some great guidance around putting together an RFP, and getting a ton of samples. Those of you who have been through district office over the last month have probably seen them in the hallway. They are now stored in that, in our office, so that we have enough space for the showcase tonight. But one of the things that we wanted with School Kit was to make sure that we had a really strong process for evaluating resources, that we were including stakeholders in those evaluations. And so School Kit helped us to choose various teachers, community members, building and district administrators, and then to actually collectively develop a vision and criteria for how we want to make resource recommendations for both math and for science. These are two separate committees. And we are on our third meeting is at the end of this week, where we will have created the criteria and where we're going to be going through sort of a mock evaluation of a resource that we knew that we weren't going to use as part of kind of practicing, and then also all the while giving School Kit feedback about what they have put together with the criteria as well. So here are some of just a couple of examples of what the slides look like that we've been working with School Kit. So for example, it always starts with a guiding question, some variation for either math or science. How can we ensure that our math resource, in this case, selection process, is aligned with our district's vision for strong math instruction and meets the needs of all students and educators? One of the first things that we did was collectively as a stakeholder group, develop a vision for math and then develop a vision for science. These were things that we had before as well. And so we took what the committee developed and then what we had previously had and kind of combined them and used that as part of the guiding posts for how we start to narrow down with our curriculum and the criteria. And then the next piece that we'll be working on is actually the resource selection is where we're going to be starting to work towards. We have that list of criteria that was collectively created by different stakeholder groups. Then we're going to look at the resources, and then they'll walk us through in some ways the idea of implementation and what it looks like to really implement high quality instructional materials. A lot of these materials, and you saw with the STEEL standards, because those are so intense, it's really powerful and important to have a resource that has done its due diligence in making sure that all of those things are accounted for over the course of it. And because they're so comprehensive for STEELs, you have a lot of really great options, but some of them are pretty different. And so making sure that our teachers, once our committee makes a recommendation for a resource, that our teachers have what they need to make sure that they truly understand what implementing that resource looks like in terms of best practices and why it was designed the way that it was. And ideally then impact positive student outcomes. So this was some of the process of what we did. So when we were putting together what we were looking for with our criteria, this is a picture of one of our groupings. So we all came up with on Post-it notes the different things that we thought were necessary and important for curriculum and a resource, and then we grouped like pieces, then we grouped again like pieces, and that was how we started narrowing down our criteria to 4 to 6 approximately. There's a little bit that came out of it, but that's okay. But it's again, speaking to what Ms. Ferraro talked about with the idea of the lens, as administrators, we could just say, you have to use this because we said so. But there is an entire set of lenses, both for our teachers and for our community members, even students in actuality, that have different reasons for why they like what they like, what works and what doesn't. And so having everybody together creates a much more comprehensive understanding of resource, and that also increases buy-in. We've experienced in districts everywhere, what happens when you just buy and hand a resource over. And so the hope is that working through this process together also makes it feel like it is a mutual ownership as opposed to just the top-down requirement.
So the last, see if there's a typo. The last part of this is just talking about some proposed changes around STEM programming. The reason I say there's a typo is that it should actually say K6. So we have something like K4 STEM happening right now, which we'll talk about. We had STEM programming in grades 5 and 6 for a couple years, and that ended up going away, and then we picked it back up again in 7th grade. So we're working to correct that. And so just to give credit, Dr. Pimentel prepared the next 2 slides. for us in terms of the content. But again, he couldn't be here, so I'll present those for him because this is related to challenge and gifted as well. And so this is all contingent on decisions made around the potential changes at Elkins Park. So pending the board approval of the closure, challenge consultants are going to change in the way that they service children. And so this may be one of the last times we use the term challenge. The concept of challenge is going to go away. It has created a little bit of confusion over the years, so we're hopefully going to correct that as we move forward. And so rather than having challenge consultants split in terms of their responsibilities where they're providing STEM and PBL experiences for all kids in their school, as well as serving students who have GIPs, the change is going to be that we're going to have teachers who are responsible solely for STEM instruction. And again, depending on the decision around Elkins Park, if we have K-5 schools moving forward, we'll be adding a STEM course in those schools. And so we will have teachers who will be STEM-only teachers. It won't be challenged. And at the same time, we'll also have teachers who are dedicated only to serving students with GIs. And so there will be a teacher at each building for those STEM courses. And they will be K through 5. At the same time, we're going to be adding a STEM course to 6th grade. Even, again, depending on what happens with Elkins Park and plans around 6th grade being situated at the mods until Cedar Brook construction is completed. That STEM program would start immediately. We won't wait for construction. And so we're already planning for that move if that is to happen. So we'll have 6th grade STEM provided by a dedicated STEM teacher starting next year. And then at the same time, we'll have a teacher whose sole responsibility is to serve students with GIPs in 6th grade as well. All right, so this is more focused around the gifted conversation. And so again, we'll have STEM teachers, but then we'll also have K-5 students with GIPs. We'll have a teacher dedicated to just serving GIPs. So they, again, challenge won't exist. They're not going to be split between those two things, only serving students with GIPs. In terms of the level of support, it will remain the same. Students currently receive services for their GIAB. The way that the teachers are scheduled now is going to look different because we'll have teachers dedicated to those two different buckets, essentially. All right. And then likewise, between K-5, 6th grade will also have a dedicated gifted teacher. Will be located at the mods, and then we'll move over to Cedar Brook. And with that, our presentation.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. This time I'll take questions and comments from the board. Let's see.
First of all, thank you very much. Very enlightening, a lot of notes here. I'm wondering if there will be any way to reuse materials that we currently have for science. I know that there are like FOSS kits and all kinds of things that have been used over the course of many years that likely still have some usable materials in them. Is there a plan for like inventorying what we have?
Yeah.
Inventory?
Yeah, I've been going around, we've sent out spreadsheets to collect some FOSS materials. We've gone around, Mr. Murphy and myself to two buildings to even physically look in and dig out what would be appropriate for the units that are coming up and look.
Just to expand on that, if you're not familiar with FOSS kits, they're big cardboard boxes. Right.
Look.
And they take up a lot of space in classrooms. And so anything that we can pull from those that are usable materials, we'll save those, but the boxes will not. If anyone wants a FOSS box, let me know. Actually, email us.
Yeah.
That's on a recording to the public.
KFR.
Other questions and comments? Mr. Schultz.
What a great presentation. This is always fun. Question around the steel standards. This might be too big of a question for this room, but I want to try to understand how they came to be, but only because I want to understand what the potential for change to them is over time, kind of given the current climates and pressures that we're getting from the federal government around certain things. Like I was looking at the standards and it talks about sustainability and environmental justice, a lot of things I'm very glad to see there, but it makes me a little bit worried that if the standards change over time in ways that we wouldn't want to see, what ability do we have as a district to maintain our own values in what we're teaching, while also adopting those standards? Does the question make sense?
It does. And I can answer it at least partially. So the first part is in true Pennsylvania fashion, we didn't adopt what everyone else adopted. And so Common Core Math came out, Common Core ELA came out, and we said, NGSS came out, and only about half the state adopted NGSS. Pennsylvania was not one of those, so we decided to go around. There was a lot of controversy around the development of the environmental literacy and sustainability standards in particular, where they were essentially being taken out. Right now, the standards are written where we have science and technology, we have environment and ecology, and we have technology and engineering, and they're all different standards documents depending on the level. So some of those are just for secondary and nothing for elementary. And so the thought was, let's get rid of all of that and come up with science, technology, and engineering. And that's it. Essentially leave it the same in terms of title, science and technology. But then there was another group that said, what about the environment?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of back and forth around include them, not include them. They had them written, they were ready to push them forward to approval, and there's various levels of approval for standards to be adopted. And before it got too far, the group that wanted the environmental standards included started to win out. And so they did get added. There was one step of that approval process that moved forward without them, and then they had to go backwards to get them back. And so with all that back and forth and all the work that has gone into this, and the shifts that school districts are making, I don't foresee them changing at this point. 2002 was really the last time the state adopted new standards for science. They're the oldest standards in the state. 2003, I think, is art. And so they're moving on to the next oldest set of standards. There's not capacity at the state to make changes.
So keep an eye in 20 years.
20 years, yes.
And that's what we kind of hope there, right?
Our curriculum cycle is on a 6-year rotation,
Yeah.
so we'll be ready to flex before the state does.
Thank you very much.
Other comments and questions? Mr. Epps.
Thanks. I guess I'll start. Good segue. And I feel like for us as a board, when I saw things, how intentional it is around how humans affect like our climate change and things like that, like we're gonna have projects. We're gonna be hearing from students about what the district should be doing or how like efforts that we could be taking. And so in some ways we can be working on our, dare I say it, policies around these things in anticipation that folks are going to be wanting to, as they learn and figure things out, they're going to be wanting to do things as well. So it seems like probably now is around the right time for us as a board to start thinking about what might be our timeline, that we start to make some decisions as the standards are being put into place and assessed based on performance. That's not a wish list, but like, what are the rules around like sustainability? What values do we have, and how do we want to like put some of these memorialize to what your points of certain things that we want to see in our district? Certainly not like a wish list or things like that, because anyway. So that's one comment, not really a question, that resonated with me. I guess a question I have that is not really around the standards, but I guess how we're assessing them. conceptually, I get Fastbridge and CDT, but practically, because I saw CDT here and how it's used, so I guess practically, how are we using those? Because they're both diagnosing something, but I guess, practically, how are we, is
So
there a
just
distinction?
to clarify, I guess Fastbridge is a screener, and so all of our students
Okay.
are going to get that screener, right?
Okay.
That gives us an indication of which students may need additional testing to further diagnose what we can do to support them best. So that's the difference between something like Fastbridge and the CBT. They're not the only two tools that we have, but they are unrelated to the shift in steel. So, and the CDT was simply up here just to mention that that is being changed, not necessarily that we're using the science CDT
Okay,
in terms of an assessment tool.
that was gonna be my next question. Okay, so, I think you already answered that, and that, at this time, that's sort of TBD. So actually, but describing it as a screener, actually, that resonates with me a lot more. Fastbridge and then CDT is a deeper diagnosis, later down the line. That's helpful. And so I guess big picture, it seems like these standards are like, yes, your students need to know X, Y, Z. How we get them there, there's a lot of discretion. And so when we hear, it was wonderful to see, the portrait of a gifted learner and all sorts of things like that, and think about the best application of these. I also thought about like, what does these standards mean for folks who have an IEP or for special education students? And so that was a wondering, not that, needs an answer right now, but.
One thing I'll just address as it relates to that is, as we're thinking about the high quality instructional materials, that's certainly a consideration. You're looking for certain supports built into a resource that can aid the teacher in providing supports to the students when they're in a science instructional classroom.
And to add on to that, from the lens of an IEP student, the tradition or the old version of science was rote memory and get it, rote memory and get it, vocabulary and get it. At times, we have different types of learners. When we're going and we're hands-on, we're being active, it gives more access to these types of learners that would maybe excel in science. But when you're just giving me a vocabulary that's multi-syllabic and like, I can't even break this down, it's overwhelming and I need to do a test, can hinder different types of learners. So I'm really excited about this shift for all of our.
And then last but not least, this wasn't the focus of the presentation, but on that list was health and physical education curriculum is under development this year too. So I am eagerly awaiting some updates on that. I don't know who's working on that, but that's all. No, sorry, but yeah, all very exciting. I know that it takes its due diligence, its work. A lean team is doing a lot, and certainly appreciate that some of these conversations are just being had. So thanks. Stop.
Other board comments and questions? Please.
I just was going back through my notes and found just one other question, which is, I get that the K-5 is the biggest shift here. But have all of our, or are there plans to have all of our science specific teachers receive like deep training on steels? Okay.
And what we're doing is aligning that with the shift in the resource.
Okay.
And there's two different facets to that professional learning, because one is to learn the resource and the other the shifts. And we can leverage one to serve the other. So that is different. So all science teachers see more PD than they want.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Speaking about resources, how did that process go? I understand what the process was supposed to be, but what was the outcome? How did that go?
Yeah, so we're only about halfway through.
Okay.
So our meeting number 3, so at this point, School Kit has given us the consolidated 2 sets of criteria for science and math from the group. We ran through it and left them some feedback. We have our next meeting with the stakeholder group on Friday, where we'll actually go through and use the criteria as sort of a practice with one of the resources, and then begin looking at resources between meeting 3 and 4, and then finalize everything at meeting 4 at the end of this month to offer a recommendation for one of the resources. So we're right in the midst of it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Superintendent Williams.
Yep, just one question. So I was looking over online for all of the various stages, and just a question related to where we are right now with the science curriculum. So, we've got some test changes coming to us pretty soon, and that aligns like with our development of the high quality instructional materials. So the question is actually about like bridging ourselves between where we are now and where we want to be with the high quality instructional materials, like how are we managing that?
So the short answer is we haven't fully developed what the implementation plan is going to look like. But the conversations with teachers and developing assessments is already going that direction. The other thing I'll add, and this partially gets back to the question you would ask in terms of the state. The science coordinator for the state has repeatedly said, while implementation is expected next year, they understand in their minds it's a 10-year process. So this is not something that they expect districts to turn around overnight, and all of a sudden next year we're still because there are so many things that are changing around science. And so the state has admitted that it's a huge lift, and they don't expect anyone to make that happen. That's very painful. And so when we think about implementation, we want to be very intentional in the load that we put on our teachers to make it change.
Yeah, sorry. I'm also thinking about what we'll see, start to look at our standardized test scores, right? We're using that as a way to evaluate. We're using that as a one way is to gather data about school performance and student performance, not as the only measure, but one of the more popular ones we talk about the most. But I'm just curious, right? You know, we're talking about what that looks like, and if we're seeing a steady increase up until today, and now we've got a new standard introduction, and those test scores change, and we're in the midst implementing new high quality instructional materials. I'm just thinking about the quality of the data and the experience for the children, but the data is going to paint a picture. And I'm curious.
You know, we saw that same change in trajectory, I'll say, in performance when the PA quarter.
Yeah.
And then trying to rebound through that change. The other piece around the data is the state has not yet, and I've asked this question every time I'm with the state presentations at SAS or the data summit that we also attended in March, and asking that question around the 2033 goal that they have around performance for school districts. That number is based on data that they calculated in 2014 and 2015. New standards get inserted into that in 25, 26. What does that do to that goal? And there's no answer to that question.
Around the conversation with curriculum development, one of the things that we're working to help lots of people, teachers in particular, understand is this idea of curriculum and that they're not the same thing. And so oftentimes people think that you adopt a resource and that's the thing that you do, you turn the page thing. But everybody, not everybody, most people expect that and also hate that because that's removes the art of teaching, right? So the idea instead is to adopt the resource and then work with teachers to actually write curriculum that aligns with the resource that helps them figure out how they want to do the what we have. And that's the piece of what we'll be working to write with them and hopefully use that to bridge the gap with assessments, with the day-to-day lessons that connects the resource purchase with how they do that work.
Got it. So as you're unpacking the high quality instructional materials, you're like in parallel, kind of developing exactly what the curriculum is and how.
Yeah, and that's what you saw, what you heard about from Ms. Ferraro about her work with Mr. Murphy was exactly that, is writing part of the curriculum. And then once the resource is in place, aligning those two things are going to be the next step.
Sorry, one more thing. This is less of a question and more of a comment. Just that I would love to see collaboration between our teachers, especially because the K-5 lift is going to be the hardest, that they might visit each other at schools if certain teachers are going to extra PD to be developed in skills, that they might host others in implementing resources and just using materials in general, just developing like that culture of collaboration, I see as a really like a bonus of this whole process. Having the teachers enjoy each other and learning from each other would be great.
A number of our PD days have been dedicated to curriculum conversations. And so we've had teachers in grade groups several times this school year already, to the point where it's not, I'm going to meet with the other 2 first grade teachers in our building, but I'm going to meet with all of the first grade teachers and hear what's happening across the district so that moving forward, what's happening is the same.
Yeah, that May 20th will be horizontal, all 4th grades together, so it's great to bounce off that.
Good board comments and questions. Mr. Schultz.
Sorry for the popcorn, but I have one or two that came out of this. One was project-based learning. Is the process for incorporating these standards into PBL part of the process you're going through around the more traditional classrooms, or is it different? I assume there is an integration process that needs to happen. Or
I
not.
understand so when you say
So-
PBL, are you talking about the high school
I am.
project-based learning? And-
So,
Okay, got
so
it. Yep.
in the high school PBL, presumably, does that need to adapt it as well with these new standards, or not?
It will.
Okay.
It's less of a lift there because they've been doing it by the nature of how we've done it.
And then my other question was IEPs and GIEPs, and this is maybe a very naive question, but right now there are sections for math and ELA, correct, in an IEP? Is that because of the standardized nature of it or not? And will we, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, will this affect how our IEPs are written? It will not. Okay.
There's not sections for ELA or math, it's just goals are based on what the student needs, which could be ELA, could be math. A lot of times, science, for example, is one area that accommodations can be easily.
So that's never been tied to these standards per se, it's not like it's a-
It could be, but science and social studies is an area where we can accommodate the most, or we find our students succeed the most. Where they don't need as much direct instruction.
I'm trying to channel if Seek were in the room, what kind of question. So, thank you, that was all.
Other board comments and questions.
Totally the last thing.
Ms. Woods.
Will we be able to see like the final selections? I'm just kidding. I'm just curious, like, what is coming down. Oh, good.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry, I've been a little out of.
You mean what are the options being considered, or what is the final recommendation?
No, I mean, like, yeah, what all is in consideration? What has it narrowed down to?
That narrowing hasn't quite been finalized yet.
Okay,
so.
yeah.
Other board comments and questions.
I will.
Lauren.
I will come. I am on both math and the science, HQIM curriculum committees, is that what we're calling them? And I will say, just from, I am there mostly as a parent, but also like I represent the, being a board member as well. And I will give both school kit and our administrative folks, I think the process has been great so far. We're only halfway through, but there's teachers, there's, administrators, both central and building administrators, and some parents. And it almost reminds me of the process you would do for a strategic plan, where you're really kind of starting with that big blue sky and we're narrowing it down, and we're getting in mixed stakeholder groups and same stakeholder groups, and really having some really great, I think, guided discussion. And I'm excited to see where it goes, because it really does feel like it's been meaningful so far, and that we're really hearing different perspectives. And also, while we didn't get down to the 6 we're supposed to, maybe we're at 8, there really has been a lot of alignment, I think. Most of us are on the same page about a lot of it, which I think is a testament to, who we are as a district and where, we want to have. So thank you to you all. So far, the process has been great, and I'm happy to give any other updates that, when you
Other board comments or questions? We got one comment, and so this is just a contextual comment from something I noticed from the standards. The new steel standards incorporate PA career ready skill standards, which are relatively new social emotional learning standards being implemented across disciplines in the state. So what I'm seeing is not only is PA focusing on a more inquiry-based interrogation approach to learning rather than rote understanding, they're also making more explicit focus on things like self-regulation, things like social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills that are focused on career readiness, but are also really core social emotional learning standards that we already want to be incorporating. And so that being integrated into these standards is an important part of our comprehensive approach to education, not just at the state level, but also here in our district. So I just wanted to highlight this is a comprehensive. Just some thank yous, Ms. Ferraro. Thank you for your translation of steel standards to teachers. It's a daunting task. I appreciate that. High quality instruction materials with Girman are really important to be interrogating our work and understanding how it's being implemented. Thank you for your work there. Steel standards, Dr. Reilly, are complicated and hard to translate. I appreciate your diligence in presenting this information to us. This time I'll entertain comments from the public. If anybody has a comment, please state your name, your location within the district, and what it is. Any online?
There are none online.
Reilly, Ms. Ferraro, Ms. Girman, thank you so much for the presentations this time.
So moved.
So moved. What's the implication back?
No, it's
Hold on.
All those in favor?
Bye.
Meeting is adjourned.